Routine in an intelligent man is a sign of ambition. Study the lives of great writers, thinkers, entrepreneurs, artists, and what you find is that most of them were people of routine. Whether it's Benjamin Franklin's rigorous schedule as outlined in his journal, Anthony Trollope's intense early morning writing sessions, or entrepreneur Sam Corco's meticulous 2-year time tracking experiment, routine is the rule, with very few exceptions. But why is routine so crucial, especially today? How can you craft one that propels you towards your goals and the life you envision? And most importantly, how do you stick to the routine that you've designed for yourself and not give up? This video will answer those questions. It is a long video. We're going to go deep. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, including the philosophy of routine, why it matters much more than you think it does, principles for routine design, routine and energy management, principles for creating a powerful daily routine, principles for creating a weekly routine. And then we're going to talk about how to stick with it and not quit, how to persist, how to make it something that is an integral part of our life. So I want to start by talking about the philosophy of routine and why it matters. And this is important. It was important for me. See, I used to be a romantic creative. I looked down upon routine. I wanted freedom, not structure. To me, routine was for someone who worked a 9 to 5 or had all these, responsibilities and obligations. I didn't want that. And so after leaving high school, I lived at home for a year while building my online business, EDM Prod. And I had the luxury of being able to manage my own schedule and use time how I pleased. And so I did exactly what most 18-year-olds would do. I worked when I wanted and how I wanted. That meant energy drinks at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night and working through to the early hours of the morning, then taking the next day off because I was so tired. It meant watching Breaking Bad at noon while eating lunch, which often ended up becoming the entire afternoon. I had no routine, I had no rhythm, and I had no consistency. It wasn't until I adopted a consistent, disciplined routine years later that I realized how unproductive I was during this time. And what I didn't understand is that for most people, including myself, without structure, you get pushed around by impulse. You get pulled into whatever is most interesting or appealing to you at any given moment, or you spend an unnecessary amount of time trying to decide what to do and you get stuck in these overthinking loops. And this is why when I wrote the first version of my book, The Producer's Guide to Workflow and Creativity, well, it was an ebook. It wasn't like a massive book, but it took me a year to write this first version because I kept stopping and starting. There was no plan. There was no set schedule. There was no, I'm going to write for 3 hours every morning until this is done. I simply wrote when I wanted to, which wasn't very often. And the second version of this book, which I wrote a few years after, took me a month. It took me a month to write the first draft and edit it. And that is a 10x increase in productivity. Why did it take me a month? Because I had a diligent, disciplined routine. I wrote every day for at least 3 to 4 hours. One of the reasons that routine makes you so much more productive is because of the operator and strategist inside your head. Imagine yourself a manager of a factory that's producing widgets, and you have an operator who works on some of the machines. When he asks you, hey, what should I be working on? And how should I be working? You say to him, well, these things should probably get done at some point, but figure it out for yourself and just play it by ear. You'll know what to do. Now, he might get some work done, but you've given him no direction. You've given him 0 deadlines, 0 structure. And so every day he comes into work and the first question on his mind is, what the hell do I do? Where do I start? How am I going to use my time? And so he expends a lot of energy simply trying to figure out what to work on before even working. Fortunately, you're a smart guy. You're a smart manager. You're a strategist. And so you change course. You give your operator clear instructions and deadlines. You tell him, for the next 2 weeks, this is the most important work to do. It will probably require 20 hours of your time. You should prioritize this before everything else, but also make sure that this task and this task are done as well. Now the operator has rules and he comes into work every day with clarity. Is the work magically easy? No, it's still work. It still requires effort. But he doesn't spend energy trying to figure out what the work is. He just does what he's been assigned. Now, this factory, it exists inside your head, and it's exactly why you must design and follow some sort of routine. There's a strategist or a manager who knows what's best for you, given your goals. When you say to yourself, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. every day and I'm going to write for 2 hours, or I'm going to go to the gym at lunchtime 4 days per week. You are acting as the strategist who knows best. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had the idea to do that in the first place. If you have that impulse, that desire to wake up early and do writing or going to the gym, you know on some fundamental level that it is a good thing. You recognize that the intention, that plan, is an improvement on whatever it is you're currently doing. Now, the role of the operator self, the person inside you who does the work, is to subjugate himself to the strategist. The strategist must be clear and direct. Here's what we're going to do. I know there's a part of us that doesn't want to do this work, but we need to override that. And that's why I'm putting this plan, this routine in place. If I don't put this plan in place, then we'll simply do what we want. And that leads to bad outcomes over the long term, which is what we don't want. So designing a routine is fundamentally the role of the strategist. Following a routine is the role of the operator. And the role of the operator is to not try and outsmart the strategist. In other words, to sum this principle up, the version of you who designs the routine for you to follow is smarter than you are when you are trying to follow it, when you feel like procrastinating, when you feel like doing something else. And you better follow the strategist's instructions, even and especially when you don't feel like following them. Routine is also a reflection of seriousness and professionalism. I mentioned how I was a romantic creative back in the day. I had this false belief that people who were artists and creators and entrepreneurs just kind of did what they wanted, and they let the muse strike and they let creativity come to them. And this couldn't be further from the truth. When you look at these people who've accomplished great things, they were often very disciplined. They were often very structured. Of course, there are exceptions. There are always exceptions, but the majority of people followed a routine. Deliberately designing and following a routine is an act of discipline, which is a reflection of your commitment to whatever it is that you're doing, your craft, your business, your project. And the 18-year-old version of me who took well over a year to write the first version of the ebook was fundamentally unserious and undisciplined. While I might have told people that I was writing an ebook and it was very important, my actions showed otherwise. I certainly wasn't writing every day or every week for that matter. A lot of talk, no action. And routine bridges the gap between those two. Routine is an act of defiance against a distracting world. The world doesn't want you to be consistent, creative, disciplined, or committed, at least not to your own personal projects. It wants you to think that you can get away with just being an operator, just feeling it out on any given day. But that isn't a working strategy. It's no match for the dopamine monsters around every corner. To avoid being a distracted zombie, you must, at the very least, have the intention to engage in more productive, useful activities. And then you must do the hard work of fulfilling that intention and making your desired routine second nature. Following a routine is acknowledging that modern life is antithetical to focus and creativity. That without clearly defined boundaries, priorities, and blocks of time, we will be pulled away from the most important work we should be doing. That's if we even begin the work in the first place, because usually without a routine, we don't even get started. To sum up this philosophy of routine, which has been a little bit long-winded, the purpose of routine is to create conditions that encourage right action. You won't always do the right action. You won't always have the perfect work day. You won't always enjoy it. But rest assured, if you design a routine and take it seriously, you will create the conditions that encourage focus, right actions, progress, and the completion of projects and important work. Routine is about following clearly defined rules instead of vague ideals. It's saying, I'm going to write 2,000 words a day, instead of, it would be nice to write 2,000 words a day, let's see how I feel. The former is a condition that encourages right action. It's precise. It's black and white. You can't just rationalize your way around it like you can with a vague ideal. And so fundamentally, routine is not planning your life down to the very minute. It's the art and strategy of prioritization, gaining clarity, and exercising discipline. It's defining what's important and then doing it day in and day out. So we've looked at the philosophy, we've looked at the why. Let's now take a look at some foundational principles to keep in mind when we plan out our own routine. So one thing I mentioned at the start of the video is that there are plenty of plug and play routines out there on the web, from productivity gurus, from entrepreneurs. But the question I have is, how often do people stick to these routines? My guess is that it's not common. The more something is templatized, the less it's thought through, right? And when it comes to creating a routine that helps you achieve what you want to achieve, it's worth spending time thinking about what that routine should look like. And if you don't give it serious thought, then it's kind of stupid, because you're designing the system. The routine is the system by which you get the work done. It's the thing that will allow you to be twice, 3 times, or in my case, with writing the book, 10 times more productive. So let's look at some principles that will help guide us. The first is that unnecessary complexity leads to failure, and most useful routines and rituals are often simple. This is something I've talked about time and time again on the channel. The optimization trap, the tendency towards thinking that the complex is somehow better than the simple. We think subconsciously that the morning routine with 10 different habits is better than the one with 5. And even when we know of this bias, we still fall victim to it again and again. And this is because the desire for complexity, the desire to hyper optimize everything, is somehow linked to avoidance of the work that matters, the simple work that matters. The more preconditions you put in place before you can take action, the longer you can delay the inevitable feeling of resistance that hits you when you sit down to do your most important work. Complexity gives you places to hide. Hyper-optimization gives you habits and routines to hide away in. You know as well as I do that if there's important creative work you have to do, like writing your book or working on your business, a lot of that stuff, it's hard. When you sit down, there's so much in your mind that's telling you, just do this instead, or procrastinate on this, or you're not feeling up to it today, you're a little too tired, or your mind's not in the right spot. There's always these excuses and rationalizations. At some point, you just have to sit down and do it, regardless of what's going on in your head. There's nothing wrong with having a morning routine, even one that has multiple rituals and habits. But if it's inhibiting your ability to take action on the work that matters, that you know is important, then how useful is it? You don't want to become the person who constantly optimizes their performance through a stack of habits, only to never actually perform in places where it counts. You don't want to become the person who does self-help for the sake of self-help. You want to put that energy towards something bigger than the self-help meta, towards the business, the book, the artistic project that you've always wanted to complete. That's what matters. Unnecessary complexity is just pseudo productivity. It might feel good, it might make you feel productive, but the lack of progress eats away at you, and you eventually end up disappointed, unfulfilled, and lacking momentum. So when it comes to designing your routine, especially your daily routine, it should be as simple as it needs to be in order to effectively make progress towards your goals. If that means waking up, getting sunlight, drinking bone broth and coffee, grounding, reading for 20 minutes, because these things truly help you do the actual work better, then all the more power to you. Just don't kid yourself. Most of the writers, creators, and entrepreneurs you admire have one thing in common. They treat the main thing as the main thing. They ensure that the path to doing that main thing is simple and as frictionless as possible, which leads to another principle. Your routine should be centered around the main thing. As Gary Keller says in his book, The One Thing, in your effort to attend all things, everything gets shortchanged and nothing gets its due. There's far more to be gained by intense singular focus than spreading yourself thin trying to solve multiple problems or push forward on multiple goals at once. And any routine that doesn't encourage the former, in my opinion, is suboptimal. And so the question to ask is, how can I design a routine that enables me to make rapid progress on my main goal without unnecessarily sacrificing other aspects of my life? For example, my main goal, my main thing at the moment is to hit 100 videos on this YouTube channel. I think this is number 81. Now, I might be able to hit that goal faster if I dedicated 12 hours a day to it, but it would affect other aspects of my life to such a degree that I would not be happy with that trade-off. While I don't spend 12 hours a day on this goal, it is the core activity in my routine. It is what everything else is centered around, right? It is the core block, essentially, the foundational block. And as much as I can, I want things in my routine to support the main thing and not interfere with it. So my morning routine is very simple. I wake up, I move around. Sometimes I read for 20 minutes or so, and then I drink a coffee and I start working within like an hour of waking up. These simple habits support and they don't interfere with my ability to do that work. Whereas I found that if I went to the gym and did a hard workout in the morning or went to jiu-jitsu, then I just wouldn't work. I wouldn't be as focused, and that was interfering with my core activity. So when you plan your routine, instead of thinking about all the things you have to fit in to achieve your 10 goals, start with the top goal, the top thing. Figure out how you can put that into your day, how you can structure it. Does that mean waking up at 6 a.m. and doing 2 hours of work? Does it mean moving your workout to the afternoon instead of the morning? It's much more effective to think about it that way instead of trying to like perfectly fit everything in. And if there's one thing you take away from this video, make it this: that focused work for a couple hours every day on your top goal is everything. So few people do this. It's actually insane. Most people don't get anywhere near 2 hours of deep work every day or every week for that matter. And so to make it as simple as possible, do the deep work, do it well, do it every day, and forget everything else. Okay, the next principle is that when it comes to routine design, you should really follow 90% time-tested strategies and 10% experimentation. Designing an effective routine is not a process of pure experimentation. You do not need to reinvent the wheel because there are first principles, there are truths that have been figured out by others, such as you need long hours of uninterrupted focus to do good work. Most people work best in the morning. Poor sleep, lack of exercise, neglect of rest will harm you in the long term and affect your ability to do the work. This list could go on. The point is that you should be wary of thinking that you're unique and different when you're likely not. And of course, there are exceptions to these rules. Charles Bukowski was a raging alcoholic and had a terrible sleep schedule. And, you know, apparently he was a great writer. But I don't know about you. I have no desire to live that kind of life. I don't even like his writing. And you probably aren't Bukowski. I'm not. And if I lived that way, my work would suffer greatly, I think. Your routine should be founded fundamentally upon these time-tested principles. It should look similar to the routine of others who have achieved or are working towards achieving the same goals you are, which sounds a little bit contradictory to what I said at the start, which is like you shouldn't just follow a preset routine, but there's nuance here, right? You should follow the fundamental parts of those preset routines that make sense and are shared across the occupations that are similar to yours. That's why if you study the schedules of writers, for example, you'll see that they are so similar. They wake up, they write with intense focus for a number of hours, and then maybe they engage in leisure or go for a walk. And if you don't believe me, then check out this book, Daily Rituals by Mason Curry. You read this, you find that there's a lot of variance in routines, but there's also a lot of similarities. And you can't escape the fact that whatever you're doing, it's going to require hours of consistent focus every day. So 90% time tested strategies. You got to do the deep work. You got to do it every day. But then on the margin, you can experiment and optimize, right? Do you work better first thing in the morning like Anthony Trollope? Or are you more effective after a slow, sort of relaxing morning with some reading, some coffee in the sun? Do you operate better with 90-minute focus sessions or 60-minute sessions? These are things that you should experiment with. They are the 10% sort of optimizations, right? The last thing I'll say on that is that you want to avoid premature experimentation, especially if you're someone who's been inconsistent and lacking momentum for some time. So following a routine, I don't know what's happening with the light in this video. It looks a bit weird. Anyway, following a routine is hard at the beginning. And when you're faced with challenge, it's easy to think that you need to change something for the sake of change. For example, you decide that your new routine is to wake up at 5 a.m. and do focused deep work for 2 hours on your most important task. The strategist in your mind has figured out that that is the best course of action, the best routine you can follow. But it's not going to be easy. In the first few days, you will likely find endless excuses for why that routine doesn't make sense and why you should change it. But you're a few days in. Of course, it's going to be hard. You're breaking out of stasis. Discomfort doesn't always mean that you should change course. Often the best strategy is to simply double down and continue on the path. Next principle is that good routine is fundamentally the art of prioritization. Some people like to follow the calendar method. They like to schedule everything down to the minute. And if that's you, then great. It's not me. My calendar is almost always bare and empty aside from calls, events, meetings that involve other people. I don't schedule my focus sessions in. I don't schedule my gym sessions in. Only events that involve other people, right? My workday, however, is not bare and empty. I have a set of cascading priorities, right? That on a day-to-day basis differ in length, but they always get done. And so it's a sort of dynamic routine. Look something like this. At the top, the most important thing is the deep work. This is priority number 1, and no other work happens prior to this getting done. Then there's the other demanding work or deep work that's not writing, right? So number 1 priority is writing. Second priority is other deep work that's not writing. Then it's exercise. If I just do these 2 things, if I just do the writing, some other deep work, and I hit the gym or I go for a run, like that is a solid day. Those are the top 3 priorities. Then it's the less demanding work. So admin, email, all that kind of stuff. Then it's reading, and then it's leisure. And so on any given day, my schedule will follow that. It'll be writing, non-writing, exercise, other work, reading, leisure time. Occasionally, I might do some writing in the evening if I feel inspired or whatever, but I just cascade down those set of priorities, and the timing differs. I might wake up later one day, but I still follow that schedule. Now, I realize that not everyone can do this, that a lot of people work 9 to 5s or you have other responsibilities. And in that case, using the calendar probably makes a lot of sense. But you should still understand that routine is about prioritization, that you should at least have a mental model of like what's most important to you. What is the top goal? What is second? And so on and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about routine, energy, and recovery. Energy, not time, is the fundamental currency of high performance. It's from Jim Lear and Tony Schwartz in their book, The Power of Full Engagement. An athlete follows a training schedule that pushes them and grows them, but also provides room for rest and recovery. They can't train all the time, otherwise they will break down physically. The mental athlete, the knowledge worker, must do similar. When designing a routine, you're not programming a robot that can operate 24/7. You're programming you, a human, with unique biochemical processes and physiological needs. And so you must design a routine that maximizes your energy by balancing challenge, stress, and rest. So, a couple of principles on this. The first is that insufficient challenge lowers energy. We constantly hear about the necessity of rest and leisure time and non-work, but the inverse is also a problem. Underworking, spending too much time in leisure, lacking sufficient demand on your cognition and resources. This destroys your energy and your spirit. The reason why is that you adapt to the environment that you're in. And if your environment is one of ease, with little challenge or stress, then why would you expect to feel energized? I'll give you a brief example of what I mean. A while back, I went on a hunting trip solo, just overnight by myself, and I was staying in my tent at the top of a mountain, and it was super windy, and I didn't get any sleep because it was so loud, so noisy, and I just couldn't fall asleep, right? Eventually, around 4 a.m., I got up and I started walking and got into a good position and so forth. And throughout that morning, I didn't feel tired because I was walking around. The environment demanded that I stay focused and awake and so on. And so I hadn't slept. And it wasn't until I got back to the car that I really felt the tiredness and the fatigue set in. Now, if I had not slept and been at home in my home office right here, I would feel completely different. I would feel tired. I would start making excuses. I wouldn't do the work. Like all these things would start going on. But because I was in an environment, because I was challenged, I felt energized. It's not the best analogy, but hopefully it proves the point. You absolutely fall to the level of your systems, but you also do, to some extent, rise to the level of your challenge. And if there's not enough challenge, then you're not going to rise. Now, this challenge and demand needs to be meaningful, otherwise it just feels like a grind. But if your routine or lack of it is not demanding enough, then you'll quickly fall into a malaise. Somewhere, somehow, your body will recognize that you don't need energy and it will take the path of least resistance. Second principle on this is that insufficient rest lowers energy, creativity, and quality of work. If you're doing any type of knowledge work that requires you to produce good ideas, make wise decisions, then a lack of rest and recovery and leisure will not only destroy your physical and mental energy, it will also destroy the quality of your work. In fact, if you're someone who struggles with the concept of rest, then you need to reframe this, because often the best ideas come to you when you're not working. And if you don't create this non-work time in your routine, then you're missing out on a form of leverage. The third principle is to work with your natural cadence. We all have slightly different ebbs and flows of energy throughout the day, and we respond differently to things like exercise. This is where experimentation is useful. If I have a productive morning where I hit 3 to 4 hours of deep work, the last thing I want to do at that point is sit down and do more work at the computer. And so that's when I go to the gym or jiu-jitsu. Now, if I follow some preset routine from some productivity YouTuber or entrepreneur guru or whatever, who said, you should only go to the gym at the end of the day because that allows you to do like 8 to 10 hours of work straight, then I'd simply be a lot less effective, right? Because I'd be working against my natural cadence, an element of which is that I crave exercise around the middle of the day. And so you have to trust your intuition here and say, I actually work better this way, even though everyone else is doing this and says I should do this. This is what seems to be better for me. And then follow that and do it like unapologetically. Fourth principle, really quick, is just to sprint and then rest. You are not a robot. You cannot work as a machine does with the same focus and intensity for the entire day. It is much better to sprint and then rest. Focus with intensity and then pull back entirely. This is the antidote to the world of productive mediocrity and low-level busy work. And if you want to learn more about this, I've made an entire video on it called Productivity Sprints, which you can find on the channel. Okay, so let's talk about designing a daily routine. I'm not going to walk you through step by step, but you can grab that reverse engineered routine document linked below. But I'm going to share some principles for designing your daily routine that will help you think about it from the ground up. Your daily routine is the engine of productive output and accomplishment. It should be carefully designed and it should be taken seriously. Most importantly, it should align with the goals you want to achieve. It should incorporate the systems that help you accomplish your goals or your goal. And so we need to begin with the end in mind, designing our routine around and for the outcome we desire. And so we want to start with the core activity. I mentioned this earlier. Our routine should be built around that top goal, the main thing. And there's a piercing question from Gary Keller's book, The One Thing, which is very helpful here. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So if your top goal is to write a book, then you better write. Like, that's the one thing. If your top goal is to grow a business, then you need to identify what that one thing is. Maybe it's building a new product. Maybe it's a marketing campaign. Maybe it's hiring a new staff member. Identify this one thing, the core activity, and then make it the cornerstone of your schedule. Make it a real commitment. Make it sacred time. No daily routine matters unless that core top goal activity is in there. So once you've defined the core activity, it's worth defining the key needle movers that should also be done on a daily basis. So for me, writing is my core activity. I do it every day. It's the work from which everything else flows. If it doesn't get done, or I'm not consistent with it, then everything else starts to suffer. However, there are other needle movers that are important work as well. They're just second in priority, right? So content ideation, production, filming like I am now, editing, building product, exercising, movement. So after I've defined my core activity, I'm figuring out where am I going to put those needle movers, where am I going to place them in terms of priority, or where am I going to schedule them in the calendar. Again, I don't use the calendar. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but if I did use a calendar, I would be scheduling these things out second. I'd start by scheduling the core activity in and then the needle movers. And then from there, it's just the rituals and rules that help you adhere to these things, that make your life better, that give you more energy. So for me, it's things like no caffeine past 12 p.m., 10,000 steps a day. Don't always hit it, but I try. Movement makes me feel good, makes me creative. Walking gives me ideas. It's something that's very useful. Active breaks away from the computer. So not checking Facebook or Twitter, but actually getting away, going outside, moving around, using the self-control app to block websites until noon. Don't always do it, but when I do, I'm very productive. And then no calls until the afternoon unless absolutely necessary. To me, these rituals, these rules, these practices are what create the ideal day in addition to the core activity and needle mover work. If I get solid deep work done, if I avoid social media, if I exercise, if I spend time with others, then it's a good day. And I want that to happen every day. Now, let's talk about morning and evening routines real quick. I'm not going to spend too long on this because I do think it's an area where you should experiment, but I'll share my point of view, which is that I lean towards the getting straight to work side of things. I tend to wake up early, like 5 to 6, and the sun at the moment in winter, like the sun's not even up. So I'm not going to do the Andrew Huberman, like walk in the sun for 30 minutes, right? So I just start work. I do like a 1 hour, 2 hour writing session, and then I'll go and do some of those other things, get some sunlight, supplements, whatever. I've found that for me, my days are significantly more enjoyable and productive when I do this, when I do a deep work session first thing in the morning. It is one of the best ways to build momentum, I think. And I'm doing the hardest thing at the start of the day, and there's value in that. I think this becomes even more important if you're trying to build something on the side before you go to your job. It's pretty hard to get solid work, and if you wake up at 7 and you have like a complex 90-minute routine before you even have the opportunity to do work, you're just not going to do any work, or you have to do it in the evening, which for most people is less effective because they're tired. So this is my personal take based on experimentation. I know plenty of people who do differently and are effective. So there's no blueprint, but there are 3 principles that I would strongly suggest you follow. The first is that waking up early, I know that it's ridiculously overdone advice, but it still works, right? Like there's a reason why it's common advice. There's something about getting up early that gives you this psychological boost and builds momentum through the rest of the day. I forgot who said it. I think it was that Sahil Bloom. He's like, if you wake up at 5 and you exercise, it's pretty hard to feel like a loser or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it's true. You wake up that early, you get a work block done, like you're killing it. You're doing well. Most people don't do that. The second is to do what gives you energy. I kind of talked about this, but for me, this is hitting that deep work writing block first thing in the morning. For others, for you, it might mean going to the gym or exercising first thing, or it might mean reading for 30 minutes and filling your mind. You probably already know what gives you energy, so just make it a consistent part of your morning. Third, don't delay your core activity work longer than necessary. Filling your morning routine with a bunch of habits and optimizations might feel productive, but if you're never doing the work that needs to be done, then what's the point? I would talk about evening routine, but I honestly don't really have one. I don't schedule that stuff in. I probably should, but there are a few things I do which may or may not be helpful to you. The first is blue light blocking glasses, dimming the lights past 7:30, no screens. This has been a game changer for me. I can't understate how great it's been for my sleep. Do it, try it out. Like, it's obvious that we shouldn't be looking at blue light when it's dark for like hours on end. Second, reading fiction, history, or biography before bed. No business or self-help. It shuts down my mind. It makes me tired. It's really good. And then this is like falls in the optimization category, but chamomile tea with collagen, L-theanine, and magnesium, that just knocks me out. Give it a go if you have struggle sleeping. Let's briefly talk about weekly routine. Just some things to think about here. A good weekly routine is built by a good daily routine, but there is value in zooming out and looking at your week as a whole, especially if you have multiple areas of responsibility that can't be integrated into a single day. So there's a few key things to think about. The first is batching, theming, structuring your week, right? I have too much on my plate to fit into one simple daily routine. And so I space this work out over the week. Monday to Wednesday for me is a heavy focus on YouTube content and writing. I do my writing every day, but at the start of the week, I'll do longer sessions, right? Thursday is usually a catch-up day. Handle some admin, do some less deep work projects. And then Friday is focused on my other businesses. Saturday, the same, or is like a catch-up day, or I do what I want day, as long as it's work. And you can take this idea pretty far, especially if you're in a position where you have some autonomy over your time. So you might schedule meetings on a particular day every week, Fridays, for example. So you have a vast amount of free calendar time to do the deep work. You might dedicate an entire day each week to just one project or side project. You might have a buffer day where you execute all those small tasks that have been hanging over your head. I talked about this more in my video on time management, which you can check out. We go deep into a bunch of strategies around this. The second thing to think about is the weekly review. This is like cornerstone of productivity 101. I used to do like a 1 hour weekly review on a Sunday, and I felt that it made very little difference to my life. So now I just do a very quick one. Like, I answer a few simple questions either on a Sunday afternoon or usually Monday morning before I start the week. And it's real simple. It takes me like 15 minutes max. The questions are: what went well? What didn't go well? What did I learn? What's the 20% driving the 80% of results? And then I answer some simple planning questions. So what's the most important thing I can do this week? What are the other 2 to 6 most important tasks that I need to do? How will I ensure maximum focus this week? And what might interrupt this? So what's coming up, events, things that might happen, and how do I protect against those? I think you should do something like this, even if it's simple and quick like mine is, because otherwise it's too easy to go week by week without any introspection or intention. You fall into doing a lot of busy work or heading in the wrong direction. The final thing that I think is useful to have as part of a weekly routine is thinking time. So at least 30 minutes a week, spending time alone with pen and paper and just thinking through something. Could be a problem in your business. It could be your relationship. It could be an idea that you're curious about or want to explore. This is one of the highest leverage things you can do and add to your routine. And it's incredibly how few people actually do it. So to give you an example, the other day I was talking to a entrepreneur friend who's very busy and he feels like he's on the hamster wheel. He said to me, he's like, I think I need better structure and routine. I'm just so overworked. I can't seem to get on top of it. And so I told him that until you step back and set aside like an hour to think and to look at everything from a bird's eye perspective and to strategize, then nothing's going to improve. And so that's what he did. He just dropped everything. He went and did that. And then he realized that there were some easy improvements he could make. He made them, and then things improved, and he kind of started getting on top of the work. This is radically simple, but it works. You should schedule this in your calendar if you know it's not going to happen otherwise, and make it something that you do at least once per week. Okay, so let's wrap this up by talking about how to stick with it and not quit. You've got the knowledge, you've got the principles, you've got some idea of how to craft your routine. Maybe you already have, but how do you actually stick with it? Intention is one thing, commitment and stickability another. The first is to create a system for tracking and holding yourself accountable. It's so easy to kid yourself. It's so easy to think that you're being productive when you're really not. This is why I recommend that people track their time, at least for like a week, to see how much they're actually working. I actually track my time as a habit, as a practice. I do it every day. I have for a long time. I do it in a simple daily note. So when I start a work block, I put in the time, 6 a.m. And then when I finish, I'll add the time. Then I'll have a little note about what I did or how focused I felt. Just the act of doing this makes you more productive. It kind of gamifies things a bit. You want to like add those blocks of time to your daily note. And you can also look back and you realize like, I was not productive today. I only got 2 hours of work done or 1 hour of work done. And you can't kid yourself. You can't lie to yourself. So this is very useful, not just for sticking with it because of that gamification element, but also realizing or kind of noticing the bottlenecks in your routine or improvements that could be made. Second thing is to not aim for perfection, but aim for change. So people fall off routines that they set and habits because they mess up. They skip a day or two and they let that become an entire week. And then they're back to where they started, usually with some rationalization that the routine was the problem, not them. The routine is hardly ever the problem. You want to stick to your routine as closely as possible. This is what challenges you. It's what gets results. And if you give yourself too much leeway, then you'll just find reasons to not do the work. However, the mental frame you must adopt is one of progress, not perfection. Each day you follow your routine and deepen the groove is progress. But just because you skip a day and fail, that doesn't mean that progress has been lost. You just had an off day, which is normal. So you need to zoom out and look at successful days and how you're changing and not just a broken chain, right? You shouldn't beat yourself up for sleeping in and not hitting your deep work target one day when a month ago you were like really lazy and procrastinating for weeks on end. That's huge change. That's huge improvement, right? So you have to take the wider view. Bad days happen. In fact, bad weeks happen, but that's not a reason to abandon your routine entirely. One way to not have complete off days is to create lower bound commitments for yourself. Because you're going to have bad days, you want to develop an intuition for what you can do on those bad days to both continue moving forward, but also adding a vote for momentum. Because you're going to have bad days, you want to develop an intuition for what you can do on those bad days so that you can add a vote for momentum. For example, I like to follow a fairly demanding routine that involves hours of deep work, hard workouts, the step count, reading, other habits. But I know that there will be days where I will wake up exhausted. Maybe I'm getting sick, maybe I've pushed the limit on training, or I've done a lot of work. And sometimes the best thing I can do is take the entire day off, which I do occasionally. But most times I know that the best thing I can do is fall back on my lower bound commitment, right? And do the one or two things that will make me feel accomplished and continue sustain that momentum. And this almost always means doing a 60 to 90 minute writing session and then maybe some reading. If I do that, even on my worst day, I will sustain that momentum. I'll feel good. Another big one is to notice and avoid self-sabotage, which obviously I can't explain how to do that in a video, nor can I really explain it at all. It's a very complex thing. But even just being aware of it will help you avoid it. So as you become more consistent with your routine and you start seeing results, what can often happen is you start to notice a voice in your head, even though you're full of energy and you feel like working. Or it might suggest that you don't really need those morning habits. You don't really need that routine. You don't really need to be doing that much deep work. Or, waking up at the same time every day, that's not really necessary because here's this other person who doesn't do that and they're more successful than you are. And if you listen to this voice, then there's a chance that you will very quickly find yourself in a state of zero momentum, having abandoned your routine and all the benefits that came with it. Ask me how I know. I've done it so many times, and every time I've looked back and gone, why did you stop? That was stupid. If it continued, you'd be so much further ahead. So simply being aware of this, noticing when it comes up, knowing what those thoughts and those triggers are, and then having the ability to suppress it and just continue on, knowing that it will eventually subside. Final tool to help you stick with it is to remind yourself of your why, both extrinsic and intrinsic. You should have multiple reasons for why you follow a routine, right? And it pays to remind yourself of why you're following it, why you have these habits and rituals and practices. And I like to do this on both an extrinsic and intrinsic level, with the latter being more powerful. So why do I follow my morning deep work routine? Why do I write every morning? Well, fundamentally, it's because I love the feeling of doing so. I love the flow states. They make my life so much better. I'm happier. I feel more fulfilled. I crave this feeling. I know what it's like, and I try to seek it every day. This is often motivation enough to follow the routine. Second to that, it's because following my routine mirrors back to me the person I want to become. I want to be consistent. I want to be someone who's focused. I want to be someone who's on the path of personal growth. Not necessarily so others can see me that way, though that's certainly an aspect of it, but because it makes me feel confident, makes me feel accomplished. It's a challenge that I'm rising up to. I like the feeling of following my routine, and sometimes I just have to explicitly remind myself of that. Also, because I know what it's like to not be like this, to not follow the routine, to not follow discipline, and I don't want to go back there. And then extrinsically, I know that if I follow this routine and stick to it, that I'll make more money, that I'll gain more status, that I'll be more respected. And just being honest, that's part of it. Those are motivations as well. And so you have this stack of motivations, the stack of whys that you can fall back on and remind yourself of when you feel like quitting. There's a lot more I could say on that, but I've been recording for quite a long time and I think I've said enough. So thanks for watching. Hope you got some value out of this video. I know it was much longer than normal, but there's a lot that I wanted to say.